Well, hello there, my friends, and welcome back. My name is Stephanie Safarian, and you're listening to episode 480 of Sustainable Minimalists. This is a listener-supported show about intentional and eco-friendly minimalist living. And on today's show, we are discussing a concrete and practical topic, which, of course, is the self-sufficient skill of canning. Now, I know it, I'll be the first to say, we have been covering some nebulous topics as of late on the show. And so hopefully today I'm giving you some motivation, some concrete tips and tricks for upping your food preservation game. Whether you're growing all your own food or buying all your own food or are somewhere in the middle, one of the most useful tools in your toolbox is the knowledge to preserve the food you have access to. Now, if you own a refrigerator or a freezer and you're freezing food on the regular, you're already using food preservation techniques. And so canning then is your natural next step. And that's because, well, there's a lot of reasons. Number one, canning is quite economical. Let's be real. The most expensive food you'll ever buy is the food you throw away. Am I right? So canning is economical. It's rooted in centuries of history. And finally, probably the most important aspect, in my humble opinion, is that the act of knowing how to preserve your food is a vital, self-sufficient life skill. Now, today's families in 2024, we are harnessing the wisdom of our grandparents and our great-grandparents by turning to food preservation for many reasons. There was, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure you remember the hysteria in the grocery store as shelves emptied and people panicked, right? But we also have rising food prices, supply chain disruptions, lost incomes due to a variety of reasons. And let's not forget, we are also living in a climate-changing world. So canning has made a comeback. Today to help me is Sarah Thresh. Sarah is affectionately known as Peelies and Petals over on TikTok. And I'm not on TikTok, but apparently she is ginormous over there. So maybe you know her, my TikTok fans. Sarah has a new cookbook coming out at the end of July. It is titled Preserving with a Purpose, Next Generation Canning Recipes and Wisdom. Sarah, I'm so excited to speak to you today about a self-sufficient skill that I retaught myself in the last 5 years. And that, of course, is canning. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Preserving is also one of my favorite things to do.
It's a match made in heaven, this
Yeah,
conversation.
for sure.
I learned from your new book coming out on July 30th, I'm so excited, that you are a third generation canner. And I really want to talk about that with you because my mother did not grow up, or she did not can when I was a child. And my grandmother even did not can. So a third generation canner is pretty darn cool. Talk to me about your family's canning history and also why is canning important to you? Like, why is it a part of your life?
Yeah, first of all, I call myself a third generation canner because that's how many generations I remember actually canning. So I started in the kitchen with my mother when I was 8. I can remember my grandmother canning. So that's why I call myself that. But my family canning recipes actually date back to the 1800s. So I know I come from a long line of predominantly women that did a lot of canning of their gardens and things. And it's important to me for a lot of different reasons. Number one is that it's preserving my own history. And number two, it helps save us money. It just does. And it helps make sure that my children always have something fresh to eat, that we're always eating the best foods available for us. And it's a lifestyle for us. I never looked at it as anything other than that. It was always just part of how we ate when I grew up. And so it was important for me to carry that on. And then it was also important that I was providing good, nutritious foods for my family at the lowest cost available.
I'm wondering if you can talk about your childhood growing up in a canning household. For me, canning is a self-sufficient skill that we collectively have lost over the generations because companies and corporations have stepped in with canned option. So we don't have to do this. I mean, it's a lot of work to stand over the pressure canner and do it. So I'm wondering if you can walk us through, why have you chosen to preserve this self-sufficient skill when you could instead just go to the supermarket and buy the literally canned varieties?
Yeah. And I like to tell people, I don't think it has to be all or nothing, right? I don't think you have to choose to live a lifestyle 100%. So for us, the reason that I grew up like this and the reason that I continue to live like this is a lot of it comes down to climate, number one. So I grew up in an area that was very long, harsh winters. We had shorter growing seasons, and we didn't always have access to all the foods that we may enjoy having all year round. A peach in February is going to cost you 10 times the amount as a peach during peach season. So I grew up where the weather dictated how we ate. And we always tried to eat what was in season, what was available at its lowest cost. And canning just came into play with that. So my mother would grow the gardens, my grandmothers grew gardens, and preserving that food was just a way of carrying us over to that next growth season. And I think with everybody, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. There is no shame in buying a can of corn at the store or canning your own. It's all about balance and what you can fit into your life and what you find enjoyable and has the benefits, the nutritional benefits, or the benefit of knowing what is in your food. It is a labor of love. My mother always says there's love in every jar. There might be a little sweat in every jar too because it's hot, and it does take a lot of work to get those jars on the shelves, but there's a sense of accomplishment that comes with that. There's a sense of knowing where your food comes from and being able to eat well all year round. So that's really why canning is important to me. And it's important for me to continue to pass this knowledge down. Really important for me to get that all in a book and get it out there, because so many times I hear people say, man, my mother didn't can, or my grandmother canned, but I was young and I wasn't paying attention and I didn't learn how to do this, but I want to now. And I think it's really important for those of us that grew up canning to make sure that stays alive and to keep passing that down.
I'm so on board with that sentiment, Sarah. I feel like when we lose these self-sufficient skills, canning is just one of them. Gardening, mending, knitting, sewing. I mean, I could go on and on. These are all self-sufficient skills that we tend to lose as the years go on. But losing these really important skills, it's not benefiting you and me or my listeners. It's benefiting the corporations who have stepped in with a product to supply the skill that we've lost.
Yeah. We've traded that convenience for time. And all of those skills that you're mentioning, those are all things that are very important for us to keep teaching these future generations, because all of these modern conveniences we have, they're all commodities. And the person that creates that commodity for you is the person that sets that pricing. And eventually, at some point, you get priced out. We have families in America right now that are dealing with food insecurity and food insufficiency because they cannot afford their food, and the food prices keep growing. So the book, the way I teach online and all these things, that I do it in the forefront of my mind is that I'm doing this to make sure that my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren have a fallback plan and can learn how to do these things and take care of themselves. And they don't rely on a corporation or a company to provide all these modern conveniences, because they'll have the knowledge should they choose to use that.
Okay, so I know you're very popular on TikTok, Sarah, and my good friend, she follows you on TikTok, but she says that your content is really engaging and helpful. But she also says that growing is a communal act and canning is a self-sufficient me first act. So you have extra, let's say, cucumbers, you give away the cucumbers, as opposed to perhaps hoarding the cucumbers and canning the cucumbers. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
I think you get to choose, right? So I was just at a food summit where I gave numerous speeches. And one of the things that I talked about is there is no self-sufficiency without community, period, end of story. Because you can't do all the things yourself. You can't bake the breads and do the sourdough and, the fermented drinks and the canning and the growing and the gardening and the mending. You can't. You literally don't have enough time to do all those things yourself. And what we have forgotten is that by creating a community, a sustainable community, then you have self-sufficiency, then you have self-security. And canning fits into that perfectly. Now, this has been many years, but canning parties used to be a thing. Canning together used to be a thing. So you would have 2 or 3 families, maybe your family members, maybe your neighbors. Each one of you would grab 3 or 4 plants, and that's what you were going to grow. So one neighbor was doing the tomatoes and onions, the other was doing the green beans and the broccoli, and everybody just split that up. And then when the harvest came in, the families came in together, and everybody brought their canners out and their folding tables, and we had prep day, we had canning day, and then we had labeling and cleaning day. And it was a communal event, and everybody got to take their jars home with their goodies. And it was such a wonderful thing because if you had a bad crop that year, if you had a bad crop of green beans, maybe your neighbor two houses down had a great crop, had a bumper crop, and they could, barter and trade some of that with you. Is canning a singular event that happens in one person's kitchen? Yes, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that way. We can continue to create these self-thriving communities, in my opinion. It was done before. I think we can bring that back.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so on board with all of that. I feel like our current way of life is so individual focused. We've taken the community out of everything.
Yeah.
And yet we can bring it back quite easily.
Yeah.
By just inviting people over.
Exactly. It really is just that simple. And I think and like you said, we don't need to talk about the direction that the world's headed. I think we can all agree that we feel less secure today than we did yesterday. But I think one of the things that we need to start looking at is how to survive in these communities, because we are all going to be squeezed out. We are not millionaires, most of us living paycheck to paycheck. Where are we going to scrimp and save, and how are we going to feed our families? And that needs to just be the primary focus right now. And I think a big part of that is utilizing the resources you have. And if you have a little plot of land, if you have one garden bed, if you have a balcony, growing something, knowing how to preserve it so you can extend the life of that food. We have to get back to the basics. And it doesn't mean that we have to turn off all the power and go off grid. It means that we need to start looking at the way we farm, the way we preserve our food, and the way we build community a little bit different than we've had to in the last 10 or 20 years.
I'm so glad you're on my show, Sarah.
Oh, thank you. I could talk about these things for days, I think, because I really want to make sure this information is documented and it's out there. I want to make sure the internet goes down tomorrow. You have a book you can pull off your shelf to take care of yourself. It's important that we preserve these things. And that's the book to me. It's not just a recipe guide, and there's plenty of recipes in there. But the reason I wrote it and the reason I titled it Preserving with a Purpose is because there is purpose in preserving.
So I'm going to say right now, I am I would say a beginner to intermediate canner. I see the benefits, so I taught myself with a pressure canner, reading the directions. I will also say I've experienced an awful lot of benefits from the practice. So canning the tomatoes, not only that I've grown, but also buying into my local farm CSA, their tomato share, and canning those tomatoes, making them into diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, like you can name it, especially pasta sauce. It's so lovely to just take out a jar of me canned pasta sauce, spaghetti sauce, heating it up on the stove. It tastes way better than anything I could ever buy in the supermarket. And there's just a satisfaction level that you cannot quantify, you cannot measure it. And so I'm on board, but I also must say that it's an awful lot of work to boil the tomatoes, peel them, boil them down into something that like looks like a sauce, add the this, that, and the other thing, the onion, the pepper, the whatever, and then can it on top of all of that. It's an awful lot of work. So what would you say to listeners who are on board with the relearning the self-sufficient skills, but just don't have the hours upon hours of time to not only learn, but also do it?
Yeah.
Like, what are your thoughts for them?
I always tell people when you're just starting off learning something, it's always going to take you a lot longer to do that one thing than if you're well versed in it. So just start small. Start with a food your family eats a lot of. Say it's tomatoes and tomato based products. Only grow tomatoes. That's it. Don't go out of your way to grow 15 different types of foods. Like you said, you can go to your farmer's market, you can go to your bulk buys, you can go other places and get that food, right? Just concentrate on that one food. Maybe this year it's just tomatoes. And then learn how to can the tomatoes the way your family likes to eat them. And just do that one thing. Too often, I think people start and they get completely overwhelmed because they want to try all the things, right? It's new and it's exciting. But when you do that, oftentimes you overwhelm yourself. And when you overwhelm yourself, then it no longer becomes gratifying. It no longer becomes joyful or fun. And like you said, you put up the tomatoes and man, it was a lot of work, but the way you felt at the end, the reward, the paycheck of pulling those off the shelf, knowing they're yours, and then feeding your family, that reward is greater than the time it took to do that. And if it's not, then it may not be for you. And canning is not the be all end all, right? There's all different types of food preservation. Maybe you get into freeze drying, maybe you get into dehydrating, maybe you get into something that maybe is less intimidating or less time consuming for you. And that's okay too. I don't think we should ever be trying to eat just one type of food preservation. I always tell everybody make sure you diversify everything and your food should be included because you're going to get sick of canned food. Share a freeze dryer with somebody. We can get into freeze drying in a minute if you want, but like share dehydrating, share your sourdough starters, share the things with the people that you know that are also walking the same kind of line you are. Make it fun, make it enjoyable, make it small. Once you start seeing those rewards, your timetables will start flipping. You'll start spending less time on this and more time on that because it's bringing you more joy or it has more rewards in it. But don't get too overwhelmed by trying to do all of them at once.
Sarah, we have to take our sponsor break, but when we come back, I want to talk about your planning. I know you, in a perfect world, plan to have a full year's worth of ingredients so that you can have meals planned. Yes. I want to know how that looks in your home, in your garden, in your canning process. So we're going to take our sponsor break, but when we come back, I'm going to ask you to break that all down. And we're back. Today I'm speaking with Sarah Thresh. She is the author of the new book titled Preserving with a Purpose, Next Generation Canning Recipes and Wisdom. It's out on July 30th. And Sarah, I want to talk about like the growing process because before we can, we must grow. So how do you even plan out your growing so that you have enough produce to then can for a year? I mean, that all just sounds, I'll be honest, like I'm not a good grower. I'm a decent canner, but all of that sounds inaccessible to me personally. So break it down.
And I think it's inaccessible to a lot of people. Let's be perfectly honest. I've been doing this for 30 plus years, right? So I have been keeping notes and charts and Excel spreadsheets and all of that stuff. And really, what I tried to do was get that in the book. So I tried to break down what are you going to need for plants? What are you going to need for jars? What are you going to need for this and that? And then I have something in there called a 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. And that's basically how I teach people to work up to that. So the goal and the idea is, do you have enough food in your home for 24 hours? 24 to 48. If you had an emergency, what would that look like for you? If you're good on that, what would it look like if you couldn't go to the grocery store for a week and then you want to build up till 1 month? And a 1 month is, oh man, I lost my job. I've lost my source of income, or my spouse passed away, or all of these life events that could happen to us, hurricanes, power outages, all these things. That's really where your sweet spot in what I call just emergency preparedness comes from. Once you get that 1 month down, the 1 year is actually way easier than you think because you're just taking the 1 month and you're multiplying it. And so let's use corn for an example. I don't grow corn. Why don't I grow corn? Number one, I stink at it. It doesn't matter what I do, I always get the corn silkworms. I'm no good at it. But what I do have access to is a corn farmer, just the next town over. And they have excellent prices on corn. The corn cans up beautifully. So, you know what? Every year, I know I need exactly 52 pints of corn because my family eats 1 pint per week on average. So, I need 52 pints of corn. So, I write that down in my little log. And then I go to my corn farmer, and when the corn comes in and it's in season, I buy it at its lowest price in bulk and I can the corn. Now I don't have to worry about corn for the whole entire year. So once you start flipping that script and looking at your food as a reoccurring resource that you're using, suddenly planning dinner is really super easy because you already know what's on the shelves. You already know what's in the freezers, you know what's in the Mylar bags, whatever you're eating that day. But that 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, that's what it looks like. You start off with a week. The week is very accessible to most everybody. Do you have enough meals planned for a week? And then you just expand on that. And I kind of go into that in the book. Not everybody wants to grow enough for a whole year. But our goal for us and our family is to either grow or get from our farmers directly, and then our grocery stores last. We want grow season to grow season. So every year in August, I know that the corn on my shelves should be basically empty. I should not have but maybe 1 or 2 pints left up there because we're getting ready to go back to the corn farmer and get more corn and can up our corn for the next year. Last year, 2023, we saved over $9,000 in groceries. So that's where it starts for most people. They start looking at that. On average, we save between 8 and 10,000 a year, just depending on what I'm growing, what I'm getting, what I have to resource somewhere else. But I think that's a big motivator for a lot of people. There's always that initial startup cost as you're like gathering your jars and your canning supplies, but that stuff pays for itself fairly quickly. And there's no cutting of coupons. There's no standing in line at the grocery stores. There's no, oh my gosh, I just got off work and we don't have any, whatever, milk at home or butter, or I've got to make dinner, whatever. I get off work 7 o'clock. I'm tired. The kids have practice. I go in there and I'm like, who wants chili? Who wants soup Toscana? Who wants chicken noodle soup? It's done and done. So you trade your time on the front end, but you more than make up for time and money on the back end.
You just said it perfectly, Sarah. I feel like people wait until the last minute and then they spend their money on the
Right.
convenient options.
It's super easy to grab the McDonald's on the way home, right?
Yeah.
That's the convenience. But the convenience is what's killing us. It may not be killing us physically, but it's killing our wallets. And then we have to work more, to make more money, to pay for more convenience. And once you start flipping that script, once you start taking back your time and saying, you know what, I'm going to spend a little time here to save this money, to save time away from work, or to invest more time in my family or more time in my garden. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not. It's not easy. This is not an easier lifestyle, but it is the more sustainable one. And it's the more rewarding one.
Yes, absolutely. So before we say goodbye, Sarah, I want to talk about, I'm going to obviously direct everybody to your new book for canning tips, but for the troubleshooting, I need to talk to you because I have some troubles and I'm talking to a canning expert and I need your thoughts. The first one, of course, is I can, everything looks good. I feel good about it. I store the cans and then I go back to taking something out of my reserves and the lid is not on.
It's not sealed.
It's not sealed. It was sealed, but it's no longer sealed. What on earth is happening?
So there's a very big lid company out there that has been making our lids for 100 years, and we're not going to name names because, I don't have that kind of lawyer money. I'm just saying, in 2016, they changed the formula on those lids. They went from boiling the lids to non boiling the lids. A lot of people didn't get that information. So if you're still using those lids, you should not boil them. And then the second thing that happened in 2020 was there was the great COVID lid shortage. And what we found was when the lids started coming back onto the market again, they were not the same lids anymore. We've been having nothing but problems with those lids. And unfortunately, that same company bought up 5 other lid companies. So they had a kind of a monopoly on the market. I have since switched to a different canning lid company. They're called Superb. And I've canned probably about 2,000 jars with those, and I've only had one not seal for me. So it's just a much better made product. It's made here in the US and Ohio. And I cannot afford to keep wasting food on the other company that's having all these issues with their lids. So I just switched. The other thing that can happen is if it's not the actual lid that's faulty for you, temperature swings. If you have them in a room that has fluctuations in the temperature, sometimes the lids can come unsealed. They're just mechanically designed to do that. As they heat and they cool, they're mechanically designed to the little button to go up and down. So that might be something. And then the other thing is you might have just had a false seal where it seemed like it sealed when you first canned it. You put it on the shelf and then that seal wasn't tight and it just came undone. If it was a false seal, then just thank your lucky stars that it came undone because that's what they're designed to do to keep you safe. Could be those couple of things. If I were a betting woman, I would say it's the brand of lids.
Thank you. But I just must ask, it's really frustrating to grab a jar and then I now have to throw it away. Talk to me about why I know I need to throw it away, but talk to us about why that food now needs to be put in the trash.
Yeah. So when we're processing our jars, whether it's water bath or pressure canning, what we're doing is we're driving all the oxygen out of the jar. We're creating that hermetic environment, so no oxygen. And that lid is to seal down on top of the jar to keep any oxygen from coming in. The only reason our food spoils is because of the air. There's mold spores in the air, there's enzymes that can get in our foods, there's bacterias, and there's things in the air that can get into our food. So by creating that environment with no oxygen and then sealing it off, creating a vacuum on the inside, then nothing can get in there that can grow or make us sick. But unfortunately, if that lid comes unsealed, whether it's during storage or maybe it just never sealed in the first place, then we can't use that food because we can't guarantee that some of that harmful things that are in our air hasn't gotten into the jar. And so it's just not safe to do at that point. You can put that food in a compost bin, which is what we do. Compost that and it goes right back into the garden. If the food has no mold or anything on it that is strange, you can boil that food up for about 10 minutes, let it cool down and feed it to your chickens or your pigs. That heating process or reheating it will kill off anything that's on the inside and then you can feed it back to your animals so it doesn't go to waste. So there are a couple of things that you can do so it's not just down the garbage disposal. But unfortunately for safety, if that lid comes unsealed, you don't know when it came unsealed and you don't know what it came in contact with, the food inside that jar needs to be gotten rid of.
Thank you. Let's talk about pressure fluctuations in the canning process. It's a long process to can, and every item has a different amount of time associated with the appropriate pressure requirements, I think is the word. However, with my pressure canner on my electric stove, I noticed the pressure gauge, like it varies widely. And I don't think it's a problem with the pressure gauge. I think it's a problem with the heat source. And so when it goes below the recipe's prescribed gauge, I then feel the need to restart the time so that my food does not have harmful bacteria in it.
Yeah, thing to do. That is the correct thing to do. So your pressure canned foods or your water bath, both of them have a couple parameters they need to hit. One is time and one is temperature. And so when you're pressure canning and that pressure falls down below where it needs to be, then you need to turn that heat source back up and restart the timer. The thing is, we don't want to start our timer until pressure is maintained. So if you're in that in between spot where you are, okay, it's going up to 12, oh, it's down to 9, oh, it's going up to 13, now it's down to 8. You haven't reached a point yet where you are maintaining pressure. So you really don't want to start that timer until you're maintaining a pressure. Now, the one thing I will find on the electric stoves is a lot of the newer stoves have safety, like cutoff temperatures. And so if the stove gets too hot, it will automatically start to cool the coil off a little bit and then heat the coil up again. That's on your newer stoves. The older ceramic and glass top stoves, they don't do that quite as much, but the new ones do. So it may just be an issue with the stove. In a case that you don't have a stove that's performing correctly for you to can, I always suggest getting one of those Camp Chef stoves, those propane burner stoves. And honest to goodness, I can 50% of my time outside anyways on my Camp Chef because I don't want to heat up my house in the summertime. So harvest comes in the summer and the fall. We don't get very warm up here, but we also don't have air conditioning. It's a whole thing. So we do canning outside a lot, and you can use those Camp Chef stoves. They work really well. And then one last thing is it also depends on the brand of the pressure canner. So I'm not going to speak ill of one or the other, but all American pressure canners are very different than like your Prestos or your Miros in the fact that the metals are created differently. So they are not equal. So in your Prestos and Miros, you have a flat sheet of aluminum that's bent up to make the shape of the canner. But in the All Americans, it's a poured aluminum. So that aluminum is really thick. And what that allows for is even heating and more pressure regulation. So it could be a multitude of things. And that, again, it's all these little nuances, right? That people don't know, especially someone like yourself. Your mom didn't pass this to you. Your grandma didn't pass this to you. You're self-taught. So it's all these little nuances that you don't know. And that's why I wanted to get it in the book. That's why I spent an entire chapter. Chapter 4 is all canning conundrums. It's just, what do I do if there's this? What do I do if there's that? Because there's all these little things that kind of come up. And if you're not a generational canner, you may not know.
Yeah.
So,
And I appreciate you helping those of us who understand that this is a self-sufficient skill and we need some troubleshooting help. I must ask you before we go though, Sarah, a lovely person that I went to middle school with. I follow her on Facebook. She grew up in a tomato canning household, and it's a family event. Everybody's on board, all hands on deck. They do it outside. Do you have any thoughts on canning outdoors? What are the benefits? How do we get started? Any thoughts there?
aside from the benefit I told you about heating or not heating your house, to me is a big benefit because if I'm heating my home and you're trying to keep it cool because it's the summertime, now you're working against yourself, right? You got to spend more money on electricity. The money you're saving on the tomatoes is going for the electricity bill. So there is that benefit to it. I just, from my own personal, this is just me, when I am outside, I feel good. So when I am canning outside or I'm cooking in my kitchen, it's the same as if you ever go camping. That the difference of having those hamburgers and hot dogs on a grill outside of your tent as opposed to making them in your kitchen. There's something unique about being outdoors and being close to nature and having your feet on the ground and bringing in your harvest and getting that in the jars outside. It also is, for me, it's like less cleanup. So I have a canner in the stove, the propane stove. All that stuff is already set up. When I'm done, I just pull it into the garage and shut the garage door. So I'm not hauling my canner up and down the stairs all the time. Or if you make a mess outside, you make a mess outside. You hose everything off. We use these plastic like folding tables and cutting boards, and I just take the hose and I hose everything off. And it's an easier cleanup too. So I just really enjoy canning outdoors. I think also it just brings me back a little bit to my childhood. So there's that nostalgia.
So your book, Preserving with a Purpose, is part helping us learn how to can, but also part recipe book.
Preserving. Yeah. There's 125-ish recipes in there, a little more, a little less, depending on, there's some variation recipes. So it is very canning heavy, but there's also what I call the kitchen wisdom. And so I had two grandmothers that were, grew up during the Great Depression, and I was raised in a waste not, want not kind of family. So there's a lot of recipes in there about how to use your food scraps, how to take things and turn them into extra meals or extra salad dressings or whatever. And then the entirety of chapter 7 is budget pantry planning. So it's just how to budget for things in your pantry to make sure that you got your staples on your shelves. There's Depression era wisdom, which is all the stuff my grandmother's taught me how to do, keeping a thrifty kitchen. And then I also have some of my very old 1800s canning recipes in there that were passed down from my family. So that whole chapter 7 is really like sweet and special to me because it is so much of my family's passed down knowledge on how my family has been able to feed themselves through the leanest of times with using all their everything, every resource they had available to them was utilized.
One more time, Sarah, where can we find you and all your goodness online?
Sure. I am Peelies and Petals or Sarah Plain and Tall. Both of those names. I am on TikTok primarily. I have over 1 million followers and supporters on TikTok. I also have a Facebook canning group. We have a Facebook page. And then I'm also on Instagram, YouTube, and geez, I think that's it. Oh, and I have a monthly mailer. So if you want to sign up for a monthly mailer, you can do that through my bio on any of my websites. And every month I send out all types of information on what's going on with that month. I send out things like coupon codes to help you get the things that you need to start in your canning journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you for bringing back this self-sufficient skill to the masses. I really appreciate your time and thank you for talking to me. I appreciate
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Listeners, that's a wrap. My friends, show notes are at mamaminimalist.com/480. We do have an eco tip today, and it comes from Libby. Libby says that she gets a lot of junk mail, and particularly after she donates to a charity, she gets put on the mailing list, and then here comes that new rush of solicitations and catalogs that you don't want. And she's found that in an awful lot of mail, there's no phone number to call. There's no company to call to request to remove yourself from their mailing lists. And so it's really wasteful. All this paper still comes in the mailbox and there's no way to put a stop to it. A few years ago, Libby said she found all of these offers and donation requests in her mailbox snowballing. And she was feeling desperate, so she tried something new, and it works. So here's what she does. These days, when she gets a mailing, she takes the response card and the envelope. She firmly crosses through the parts saying that she wants to subscribe or donate or whatever it is they want. And instead, she hand writes in the blank area something along the lines of, please remove me from your mailing list and do not sell or share my contact information. Then she pops that card back in the mailbox in the official envelope and she mails it back. This often, she says, doesn't even require postage because many of these envelopes are already prepaid. Libby says that after doing this for a few months, almost all of her junk mail stopped. Now that is amazing, is it not? She says these days she's going weeks without getting any junk mail. And if she does get some, she just follows her own protocol, writes on the mailer, please remove me and do not sell my information. I love this tip, Libby. So good. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Listeners, we'll be back on Thursday where it's a solo episode. It's just me and you. I've had a lot of interviews lately, but if you love the solo episodes, Thursdays is for you. We're discussing creating over consuming. I'll see you then. Reach out if you need me and take care.